Welcome, everybody, to this informational webinar on the North American Bioeconomy Data Alliance, or NABDA. I'm Heather Tunstall. I'm Chief Content Officer of Meister Media Worldwide and the co-chair of the Global Ag Tech Initiative. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're very excited about this program. We have some phenomenal organizations on the line as well, including the U.S. Department of Energy, Bioenergy Technologies Office, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Office of the Chief Information Office, BASF, John Deere, ExxonMobil Corporation, Accenture, Rabobank, Canadian Fuels Association, Prairies Canada Economic Development, Ag Gateway, Iowa State University, and Tuskegee University, just to name a few. Before we launch into the meat of the webinar and why you're all here today, there's just a few housekeeping items I want you to be aware of as we go through this. Feel free to use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen to interact with the entire group or send direct messages to a specific attendee if you'd like. If you do have a question for the panelists, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Other attendees will not see what you type there, but we will, and we'll answer these questions during our audience Q&A. So feel free to drop any questions in there at any time throughout the presentation. And speaking of the audience Q&A, it'll take place about 2/3 of the way through this webinar, not at the end, so a little different than some other webinars. So make sure to stick around through that portion because we'll have more information directly following the audience Q&A. Now on to the good stuff. NABDA formed through the vision of highly engaged ambassadors of the Women in Ag Tech program who saw a need in the industry in both Canada and the United States for better management of feedstock data. The founding partners include Industries in Transition, led by Wendy out of Canada, Mission Critical, represented by Joyce Hunter, AquaSpy, represented by Kathleen Glass, and Meister Media Worldwide, represented by myself and Laura Sawinski. Speaking of Laura, I'm going to hand it over to her now to talk a little bit about what we'll be learning about today.
Thank you, Heather, very much. My name is Laura Sawinski, Group Editor for the Crop Life Media Group and leader of our Women in Ag Tech initiative. As the story goes, it was during our January meeting of Women in Ag Tech where Joyce and Wendy met. They started chatting about data standardization, the feedstock supply chain, and the unique aspects of the Canadian and U.S. markets. They also discovered a shared enthusiasm for the opportunities of the bioeconomy. So at present, feedstock data management is siloed and fragmented with no single standard setter. NABDA aims to fill that role by facilitating working sessions that are thoughtful and action-oriented with representation from key industries, as well as from academia, government, and the private sector. So true collaboration. During our webinar, Wendy and Joyce will share the NABDA framework and plan. We'll open it up for Q&A and discussion, as Heather mentioned, and then Kathleen will talk about next steps for getting involved in NABDA. So let me tell you a little bit about Wendy, Joyce, and Kathleen. Wendy L. is President of Industries in Transition, where she leads a team of senior consultants who are well connected to key decision makers found at all stages of the evolving energy, agriculture, and agri-food supply chains. She holds nearly 30 years of experience as a business strategist and has built business plans and coordinated special alliances for more than 100 businesses and sectoral coalitions in the sectors of oil and gas, agriculture, forestry, food and beverages, consumer products, professional services, and advanced technology. Wendy's consulting and communications work aligns with the directives of government, academia, and the corporate sector with those in production, processing, engineering, construction, and the various modes of transportation that underpin the flow of our energy sector, built environments, and the entire farm-to-fork food system. Joyce Hunter is Executive Director for Collaboration and Education at Mission Critical, a critical infrastructure and cybersecurity think tank. Prior to joining Mission Critical, she served as Executive Director for the Institute for Critical Infrastructure Technology. Previously, Joyce served as both the Deputy CIO of Policy and Planning and the Acting CIO of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. She has also held other senior leadership roles within the federal government, Development Corp, Lawson Software, and Computer Science Corporation. Joyce sits on multiple boards and is active in several philanthropies focused on advancing STEM and data science education for underserved and underrepresented youth. Kathleen Glass is Vice President of Global Marketing at AquaSpy, where she helps farmers embrace intelligent below-ground technology to conserve water and make their farms more profitable. Kathleen has over 2 decades of sales and marketing experience in SaaS and managed services for emerging technologies, including IoT, cybersecurity, privacy, and AI. Kathleen is an active community volunteer, including serving as an ambassador for the Women in AgTech group and an active member of the Global AgTech Alliance. Heather, back to you.
Thanks so much, Laura. To share a little bit about why Meister Media is involved, we are so proud to join forces as a founding partner of NABDA. Our nearly century-long commitment to empowering and supporting the agriculture industry extends into the feedstock and data management realms through our Global AgTech Initiative and our Crop Life and Agribusiness Global Media brands as part of our coverage of food, fuel, feed, and fiber. We believe this is a vital initiative to serve a need in the industry through innovation, technology, and of course, governance. With that, I am so pleased and very happy to introduce Joyce Hunter, co-founder of NABDA and Executive Director for Collaboration and Education at Mission Critical. Joyce?
Thank you very much, Heather. We appreciate your introduction, and Laura, we appreciate your introduction as well. So what, so where, so why are we doing this? Our mission, vision, and value is that we were created to unite stakeholders across the bioeconomy, offering a collaborative, data-driven platform to foster innovation, enhance sustainability, and drive North America's leadership in this critical infrastructure. Next slide. So why are we doing this? There have been so many groups out there talking about this, but nobody's actually executed. We have a lot of different reports on both the Canadian side and the US side, including a recent one from the National Science Foundation, but it's gathering dust. So we are here to actually energize and execute on some of those initiatives. Our goal is to bridge diverse sectors, facilitating the sharing of data and ideas to accelerate innovation and sustainability. By promoting collaboration, we're also ensuring that North America stays competitive in the global bioeconomy. And so what are our proposed activities going to be? We're looking at monthly meetings. So our October meeting is going to focus on the current issues. Then we're going to have a meeting in November and a meeting in December. So we are engaging experts, all of you, that are in the various fields in monthly meetings to tackle these key bioeconomy challenges. Our goal is to develop actionable recommendations that will be shared in a public report with ongoing collaboration to ensure long-term impact. This is not a one and done. We're not going to have this meeting and then go off into the ether. We're not going to have the meetings in October, November, and December and create more shelfware. We're going to create an actionable plan that's sustainable, that moves forward to the next iteration of where we think that this collaboration should be. So now I'm going to turn it over to Wendy.
Great. Thanks very much, Joyce. So my job is just to, Joyce did a really good job of talking about the fact that very monthly we're getting together as groups to talk about sort of taking NABDA, bringing the right stakeholders together to talk about all the challenging things that we need to do to start to identify where the silos exist across Canada itself, across the US, and then collectively between Canada and the US. One big thing we're doing is we're actually going to be conducting a working session, a virtual working session on November 7th. Our idea is to have 35 to 55 stakeholders in the room that represent various aspects of the innovation ecosystem and the value chains. The reason we want to have this working session actually representative of across the value chain is because we know that with good biomass and feedstock quantification, qualification, our quality assessments and management, we know that there are various data points all across. So when we produce the biomass, when we want to store it, when we want to transport it, when it is processed, regionalization of that processing, and also what are the kinds of information that a buyer may want to know. Does a buyer want to know the moisture level? Does a buyer want to know the degree of risk with respect to pathogens in the material? So there's a lot of things that we're wanting to step into to start to identify what are those important data data points upon which we can improve the efficiencies across the value chain of the production, the identification, the valuation, the storage, the pickup. And as this happens, we're developing a brand new supply chain. So new suppliers will come into the mix. Pre-existing suppliers will vertically integrate to allow us to have that efficiency in the trucking and the storing and all of that. And we also know that there is a significant importance of timing. And so we're going to be putting a real consideration on asking a lot of the stakeholders some challenging questions about timing. How do we do this right? And Joyce also alluded to the importance of kind of the governance of data. So there's a lot of reports out there that are drawing some of the same conclusions. Here's just 3 of them. And the beauty of my job is I get to do a lot of primary research, but also a lot of secondary research, which has me reading a lot of reports. And we're seeing across Canada and the US, a lot of these reports on what's holding us back with respect to the advancements of the bioeconomy are drawing a lot of the same conclusions. Unwillingness to share certain data, there is competitive play. So part of what we're wanting to do is really step into some of these things to identify what does make sense. And so what we are not is to create alignment between Canada and the US for everything. That's not what we're trying to accomplish. But what we're trying to accomplish is that disparate groups are doing some wonderful work. And how do we pull them together? At the end of the day, NABDA's job is not to carry or be the ones defining regulation. NABDA's job is to bring these disparate groups together because of the connections that all of us bring in here today and the connections that the future NABDA partners will also be bringing. So when we look at the development of the working session on November 7th, we have some commitments for partners already. So we're already thrilled with, the bums and seats we've already got for this event. But what we'll be really looking at is that dichotomy that does exist between the desire for profit and business development goals and economic realities of the system also playing itself with the climate and ecological realities and those cycles of nature that in some cases we have control over and we don't. And so in this particular working session, we're going to be asking some questions about, what are those data points that should and shouldn't be shared? In which case should we try to govern things? And what is the degree and the appetite for that kind of governance? We will be really looking at some difficult questions with respect to the return on investment if we were to share certain data sets and if we were to not. And so as mentioned, our role is really to sort of act as facilitators in this exercise and to sort of accelerate action or accelerate clear indications of when inaction should happen because of all the siloed effects. So it's a bit of a sort of hurdling everybody together. So 4 key things that the working session will be doing, really mapping where we sit currently and starting to define what that desired state could look like. Where do we need these data sets currently? Where are they held? Who are the owners of this data? Is the data accurate? What are the ways that we could possibly harmonize the data as we bring it together? But one of the big things we'll be doing is we'll be looking at these supply chains. So we'll be doing some exercises that really have everyone, people that are involved may represent just one part of the value chain. So it's an important opportunity for folks to sort of see that, different biomass products are used for different end uses. And so we can actually start to look at the need to have that front end quantification and valuation exercise be working for us, because we have a lot of folks that want access to it, or we have a lot of producers that don't recognize the value in it and have no idea on where to reach a buyer. So there's this lovely opportunity for connectivity and sort of the management of that. We'll be talking about sort of the natural evolution of growth of a supply chain. So some work that I did very similar with the battery metal sector. So both Canada and the US are starting to identify component parts. Well, that brand new value chain is starting to grow itself. And in some cases, it's doing so well in a very good way. But in some cases, we're still needing to sort of order products from other countries. And so how do we actually start to move ahead with respect to sort of optimization in this fashion? And then, as I mentioned, the appetite for governance. As we step into this and have some difficult discussions, some of the owners of this data are going to see the opportunity to come together, but there is going to be some clear indications of when it doesn't make sense. And I think that's the beauty of this kind of an exercise, is to sort of develop those standards of practice so that we can generate what are we going to do in the short term to get some, efficiency through our circularity agendas or net zero agendas. But then what can we start to do long term that is really promising with respect to efficiency and growing a supply chain that is profitable, that is making sense, and that is efficient. Again, as I mentioned, we will be bringing timing into consideration, looking at everything from the political realities to perhaps social factors that are at bay with respect to accelerating or even a challenge that we may have in certainly stalling some of what we're wanting to do. So will be a 2-hour session. A lot to accomplish in 2 hours, but we'll be coming together. And at the end of the session, a real key factor is to identify that who's missing in the room. So how does NABDA either bring folks in as partners or somehow connect itself with some of the great work that folks are doing in coalition groups in Canada, in the US, and across the borders? So as we start to ourselves scale up and start to generate activation, we are going to need our plug ourselves into all, we're already plugged into so many different areas, but there's a lot of things with respect to sharing of communications. So we know that communications is a big avenue with respect to the different ecosystems and the chambers that don't necessarily talk to one another. So we will be starting to develop, and that's the beauty of having a media partner, where we have the ability to actually have, the written word get out to individuals that don't necessarily talk to one another, and have the opportunity to connect and come together through events and things like that. We also need members that are interested in helping to facilitate discussions. We're asking for folks to kind of come on board, for funding. And Kathleen is going to talk about that, after the Q&A a little bit more. But we are looking for a little bit of funding for the actual session in November. We've got some wonderful partners for seed funding, but we are going to be looking at developing sustainable funding going forward. So we already have that train on the go. And I think the next effort is just to kind of go to a Q&A to hear from all of you, and to maybe get some questions out. And I know that, Laura, I think you have some prepared questions for us as well. So if everyone's okay, I was just going to kind of stop sharing here and just maybe go to a bit of a Q&A.
Thank you so much, Wendy. I do have a couple questions to kind of get things going here. I think what's compelling to me is when we look at energy, agriculture, and forestry, there's a common thread, if you will, but then obviously these are sectors that are kind of doing their own thing. You have a unique experience in that you've come from each of these. Can you talk a little bit about that?
For sure. So if you look at kind of the last 4 years, I've been really knee deep in realizing this nexus that does exist between energy, agriculture, forestry. A lot of the sectors that they themselves are under a lot of pressure to be better stewards of the land, management of water and whatnot. But in order to accomplish sort of the greatness in terms of where we're wanting to go with respect to net zero goals, the only real way to do it is to bring them together. So I've done a series of workshops through 2020, 2021, and again in 2023 in Canada, where I brought a lot of these varying stakeholders together. And we've arrived at the conclusions that some significant things can happen coming together. So for example, I'll give you one example, Agrivoltaics Canada is an opportunity where we have solar applications coming together with a farm operation, whether it's a grazing operation or a unique row crop that has the ability to actually thrive under the solar panels. So there's this beautiful ability to not have a this or that answer, but an and answer where we can do both. And so generating gains with respect to the economics of things, but then also generating gains with respect to environmental goals. So that's the work that I've kind of done there. I've purposely placed myself there, and I'm excited to see that a lot of folks are kind of moving the agenda forward in their own ways.
I think the other thing, and you kind of alluded to this on the one slide where you showed the 3 different quotes, if you will, saying that this isn't happening yet. And notwithstanding the complexities, of course, but like, why hasn't anyone really done this yet? I mean, what do you and Joyce and what does the panel think about that? Putting you on the hot seat a little
Yeah,
bit.
no, for sure. Joyce, do you want to answer that or do you want me to?
I think I can answer
Go
that
ahead.
very
Okay.
directly. It fosters collaboration across the bioeconomy. I think what has happened is because it's so siloed, everybody's afraid to jump out there first. You know, they don't want it to be an all energy solution. They don't want it to be an all agriculture solution. So, but agriculture is essential to the bioeconomy, and NABDA unites all the stakeholders across the sector, such as energy, manufacturing, and forestry. This cross-sector collaboration actually fosters the creation of a new bio-based products, technologies, and services that benefit the entire community, not just one. So by bringing together these diverse stakeholders, NABDA helps align agricultural practices with broader bioeconomic goals such as reducing carbon emissions and promoting renewable energy. So our focus on the data-driven solutions will help improve food security, making agriculture systems more resilient to shocks such as climate change, pests, and disease outbreaks. So this data integration actually enables better management of the resources like water, land, fertilizers, and helps farmers maximize productivity while minimizing their environmental footprint.
I just, as I was thinking about NABDA and again, right now, the thing that I often think about in 2011, when FDA's Food Safety Mod Act came into force, and at that time, it was similar in that this was a huge effort. I don't think they had made an overhaul like this in like 4 decades, something to that effect. And I think the willingness amongst the industry, from farmers to transporters all the way to the grocery folks, the willingness was there to improve food safety. But it was when the technology finally kind of came along to support the record keeping, the compliance, the visibility, cold chain, the integrity of the cold chain. And I feel like while this is a big thing that we're undertaking, I think the technology is here now. When we look at AI, we look at IoT. I think we can do this. I mean, it's possible now. It's not just, yeah, this sounds great. The tools are there. Do y'all have any comments on that?
I do, yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I've seen, and this sort of to both your comments, the technology is here, but why haven't we done it up until now type of thing, is really we have this technology available, but what I've been seeing over the years is that folks don't necessarily want to jump into it unless they themselves have an agenda. So I now need to buy X amount of biomass to generate a pipeline to my canola crushing plant or whatnot for cleaner fuel strategy, or for something movement to biochar, or all these different strategies where the biomass is going to different areas. Wouldn't it be nice if I had access to real quantification? Wouldn't it be nice if I had access to all the different farmers that had the willingness to sell? And so we're coming at it almost backwards, like when we want to generate an action in the system, wouldn't it be nice to have the data, is sort of what we're seeing. And with respect to a farmer, we have farmers out there that are taking their hay and they're thinking the best thing to do with it is to put it under their animals. Not saying that's a bad thing as a bad for the animals, but what I am saying is they don't necessarily recognize the value on some of the things that they are sitting on already from a waste perspective, but then also what they could be planting that has huge value for the different buyers. And so if that front end loss of recognition in sort of that value isn't there, then we're not able to quantify it and we're not able to get the buy sell action efforts going
And
forward.
and also through data sharing and collaboration, what NABDA will do, it will help the agriculture sector address both current challenges. Like I said before, we're not talking about a one and done. We're not talking about just here for the next 3 months. We're looking at future demands. Everything is changing so rapidly that we as North America have got to step it up and ensure that the North American agriculture remains a leader in the global bioeconomy.
Excellent. I want to remind the audience that we will have provide the email address for Joyce and Wendy at the end of the program. That way you could follow up with any comments or questions. Kathleen, let's hear from you.
Wanted to remind everyone that to please use the Q&A section. Please ask us questions. I know we have a diverse representation from different folks across the supply chain. In fact, we were all really intrigued and fascinated. Like, oh, we hadn't thought about that. So we saw some of your titles and we were like, oh, that's really fascinating. And so, that's exactly what we want, is that representation. And so as Wendy, I think, and Joyce, actually, Joyce just reminded us, this isn't a once and done. There you go. This isn't a once and done. We have our initial working session coming up on November 7th. And so what we want to ask of you is a participation for that of $15,000 US. And that's to get us off the ground, to do the promotion, to have a quality report out. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, and we can talk about our report out through this. And then we're really looking to, excuse me, establish a sustaining funding and partnership long-term. So not just these 3 sessions, these 3 months that Joyce reminded us that we want this to have, we're assuming optimistically that the report out finds that there's need for this. That's really what the working session's about. And once we have that confirmation, that we want to work together to establish sustaining funding and partnerships through, and this is not an exclusive list at all. In fact, we'd like your ideas on this as well from the audience. But we thought, government grants, sustaining corporate partnerships and sponsorships. We did see some corporation names on our audience today. So would like your thoughts on that, as well as event participation fees. And I'll have Wendy and Joyce's emails up here in just a second. And then going into detail, I know there's a lot on this slide, but the first few bullet points really are things that you already heard from Wendy and Joyce talking about what the goals are. And so we want those folks that are looking for a seat at the table, who want to give input into the process and developing a working model. We are looking for folks to be contributors, to be part of this, building this. I mean, we're excited about it. We want others that are excited about this too, building this groundbreaking governance modeling. There's a lot of opportunity in this to be on the ground floor, to have an insider's look at the best practices that will influence your business and others for new ideas, new products, mitigation of risk, transportation of raw materials, processing and delivery to demand markets. I mean, there are so many pieces across the supply chain, and this is your opportunity to be in at that ground level, to have that voice, and then have a firsthand look at those various paths. I mean, Wendy had some really great charts on there, and really being able to connect that and influence that. So for the participation for the $15,000 US, you would get all of this opportunity. You'd have 2 tickets to attend the November 7th working session. It'll be virtual, so it'll be inclusive. So wherever you are in North America, we'd like to cap that at 50 folks because we want it to be very collaborative and interactive. So unlike this one where you just have those of us, there's 5 of us here up on the screen, for this virtual working session, it's going to be collaborative. We'll probably have maybe some breakout sections, but it'll be interactive. You all will have a voice and an ability to contribute fully on that. A really wonderful, and maybe after I finish, Joyce might give us a little bit more information about Mission Critical. In this, you all get a 1-year membership to Mission Critical Nonpartisan Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Think Tank. That is a value all by itself of $12,000 US. So you're basically getting this full value of this really important and interesting think tank access, along with their monthly legislative briefings. And all the rest of these slides, all the rest of the bullets really are about recognition, logo recognitions, mentioned during the roundtable virtual meeting, the ability to add to a thank you message to all the participants in the event, recognition in a 250-word partner messages, also recognition at the Meister Media hosted Q1 webinar, sharing our NABDA research report out, as well as in regular promotional communications and logo signage at the NABDA booth, which Meister has provided at the Tech Hub Live event in July in Des Moines, Iowa. So today already, and Wendy mentioned this, that we already have had some very wonderful interest to date. And so some of the partnerships and participants that have shown commitment and interest include the Canadian Agri-Food Automation Innovation Alliance, Industries in Transition, obviously Meister Media, and the Global Ag Tech Initiative, Mission Critical USA, the U.S. Department of Energy, and the universities of Idaho and Minnesota. So already starting to build up participants and stakeholders within the supply chain, but obviously we need to fill in a whole lot of other elements on that as well. And if you are interested or have further questions, also do Q&A, but you can reach out to Wendy L. in Canada or Joyce Hunter in US here with their emails on the screen.
Great, thank you, Kathleen. Let's get to a couple questions, time permitting. I'm going to pitch this out to the panel. The question is, when you ask a farmer for production data, you are asking for his or her intellectual property. How do you formulate a plan to compensate them for the IP?
Yeah, this is exactly it. And so as we start to talk about that, personally, I've seen a lot of things happen. And so there's a similar exercise that has been going on in oil and gas, is that we started to recognize that the producer themselves needs to get their information elsewhere. And there's going to be a reluctance unless there is, some sort of value back to them. So I think that needs to actually be discussed as a group as to whether that value comes back to them at the point of data sharing. So when the data is brought up, if there is an actual sharing cost associated with that, or if the cost comes back to that in promise later of sort of orders, is as we start to get the quantification up, they're able to see the big picture. And so that's what part of that discussion is with respect to all those different stages, is how do we deliver return on investment back to everyone, both at what they do with respect to the government's supply and sharing of data, and then also what is done with respect to what that data can accomplish in the forward. So do you get bonusing at the back end? And then that's where I think a lot of that needs to be discussed.
Yeah, so some of the ways there are monetary compensation, there are in-kind benefits, there are participating in profit-generating projects. So this is part of what this working group is about. We're not here we're facilitators. We're not going to, put down the hammer and say, thou shalt do this, that, or the other thing. But other profit sharing, co-ownership of the data-driven projects, grants and subsidies, as we were talking about, government and private sector grants, corporate sponsorships, which is what we're talking about now, data sovereignty. That's absolutely important. The farmers maintain ownership of their data, and allowing you all to control how it's used and ensure that you benefit from the value. NABDA could create clear agreements outlining farmers' rights to access and use the data for their own purposes and other things. But that's what we have to get to. And that's what we're going to be talking about in these working sessions.
Great. Let me pitch another one to you ladies. Any consideration for including farming carbon intensity data gathering and standards, including soil carbon sequestration and CO product values?
So if I'm understanding the question, I'm gonna say yes. So for example, if a farmer has hemp that has the capacity to be turned into biochar. We have the ability for a sequestration exercise there. If one of the benefits of what's the timing of when we're trying to do this is in Canada, we have a significant movement with an organization or a coalition of 150 organizations called the Center for Agri-Food Benchmarking. And they have identified what are the important factors at the front end and actually across the value chain. And they've identified, of course, the measurement of improvements to carbon soil as being extremely important. Now, what we don't have is what are the kinds of tooling, the probes, and the standards of practice with respect to which ones measure more accurately and numbers being sort of carried forward. We are doing that. There's a lot of folks in Canada that are literally doing that testing right now. So the beauty is in about a year's time, I know of 2 reports that are literally coming out with respect to the kinds of probes that will be the standard of practice probes upon which we can actually start to measure improvements in soil conditions and whether that be from practices on the farm or energy ag initiatives where, if you're improving with cover crops, if you're using solar to move to regenerative, there's a lot of different practices that will allow us to actually start to measure the carbon soil gains. So I hope I answered that. I don't know if the others have anything else to add to that.
Probably this is a good time to bring up something called the ABLC. It is the Global Bioeconomy Leadership Summit. I don't know whether some of you know about it or some of you don't, but it's like everybody's trying to talk about actionable results in doing this. And so, here's yet another organization. They have something like 178 members of that organization that's going to meet sometime in late October to talk about the strategies for going forward. And so, are we competing with them? No, because we are actually putting together a smaller coalition, only 30 to 50 people, where everybody's going to hopefully have a really good voice in determining our future in this North American bioeconomy. So I believe that we have a window of time in which we can really make something happen. There is transition all over the place, not only, including in the United States, but other parts of the world. And we want to solidify and codify the fact that we're going to be leaders in this bioeconomy area.
Great. Thank you, Joyce. Let's take one last question here. Joyce said in her opening remarks, comments to the effect that NABDA needs to step up this work because others are not doing so. So the question is, what entities, both in North America and around the world, have you checked in with to find much of the work you plan to do, which has already been done or is in progress?
Yeah, I mean, the reports are done. A lot of the reports are done. What we're talking about is taking the reports that have already been published, taking them and infusing them into our work group, finding out what the gaps are, and then determining how we fill in those gaps, and then what are the next steps to moving forward. How do we take it off the shelf and make it actionable?
And we'll include those groups. I mean, if they're authors of
Yeah.
those groups, we'll reach out to them and get their participation.
Yes.
I have some specific companies I'd like to call out for having done great work. So in the context of Canada, the Center for Research Innovation on Bioeconomy, they are doing some wonderful work with respect to kind of appreciating the actual quantification of the biomass. What we're not doing is actually taking it all the way through, but they are doing an outstanding with a part of that. The Center for Agri-Food Benchmarking, as I mentioned, is doing a wonderful job of bringing some very major stakeholders that involve government, association, and industry all around agreeing on the performance metrics that matter. And then once we know what performance metrics matter, we then start to use the instrumentation to measure those initiatives through a metrics modeling. CAIN, the Canadian Agri-Food Automation Innovation Network, they are doing some wonderful work with respect to understanding and appreciating the value of data and how it evolves into sort of decision making across the board. CANSA, in the Canadian Agricultural Network for our net zero agriculture, and that they are actually doing some testing right now on the soil probes and biodigesters on farms, and they're looking to develop appreciation for literally the mechanics and the modeling that works better, so that we can actually start to standardize and generate efficiencies instead of having a whole bunch of different technological ways to build them. So there's generating an exercise of efficiency there. So there are a few folks that have done a lot of great work already, and I think the idea is to kind of decide how they are pulled into the effort, or use of intelligence for knowledge sharing. Anyways.
Great, thank you, Wendy. So as we near a close here, I'm just gonna ask Wendy and Joyce to share a closing comment or thought, and then we'll share again your email addresses. Wendy, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks. So for me, just closing thought is understanding and appreciating that our role is more as facilitators. What we have seen through the work that we've done is that the end-to-end activation has not been figured out. We see the opportunity ahead of us with respect to generating efficiencies in all those various stages of pickup and transport and processing. And we know that one way to do it is to do the difficult work of rolling up our sleeves to identify how we can gain some efficiencies in that space, so that money can be flowing into the hands of the right folks that need it. A farmer is struggling with their balance sheet. How do we provide them access to another source of revenue at the front end and have the trickle effect gain with respect to improvements in buying and selling? So I guess my point is just really to have folks appreciate that we don't have it figured out yet, but what we do know is that we have the capacity to bring groups together. So appreciate everyone's support.
Joyce?
Yeah, I guess, it's so much information that I don't want to do the fire hydrant, and just dump. So I'll try and pick three. One is data cooperatives, going back to farmers owning their data. I know how important that is. So farmers could form data cooperatives where they collectively own and manage the data, and through NABDA, the cooperative can negotiate fair compensation from third-party users and maintain control over data usage. Second is educational and capacity building opportunities. NABDA could offer farmers training programs to help them better understand the value of their data and how to leverage it for business growth. Farmers could receive an ongoing education about data analytics, sustainability practices, and new agricultural technologies. Partnerships with industry and academia. I know a lot of you already have these partnerships, but we are expanding that aperture. So farmers who provide data could form long-term partnerships with industry and academic institutions. I think that's evident by the academic institutions who are on the line today, benefiting from early access to innovation, pilot projects, or industry collaborations. Talking about carbon credits, there are a list of things that we can actually talk about as far as the benefits that all of us collaboratively, because we have a piece of the lens, but we don't have the entire lens. So that's why we're putting this meeting together, so we can get everybody's thoughts and ideas and make sure that we have the appropriate governance platform. And I know when we say governance, a lot of people run. But the important thing about governance is that we will have a standardized platform with which to build all of these solutions on top of, and we won't be conflicting with each other.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us today. We hope you learned a lot about the North American Bioeconomy Data Alliance. And for more information or to stay in touch, if you visit globalagtechinitiative.com, you'll see on the horizontal nav bar for NABDA. And from there, you can fill out a form and we'll stay in touch with you. And likewise, we invite you to stay in touch with Joyce and Wendy. And thanks again for your time.
Everyone.
Live long and prosper.